And so at long last another video. I have been a bit busy over the summer. One of the places I visited just a few weeks ago was the town of Arles in the south of France. Arles, most famous for the 15 months between February 1888 and May 1889, when it was the home to Vincent van Gogh during one of his most productive and artistically successful periods of his short life, at least up until the unfortunate ear episode. As a penniless artist myself, it still rankles with me that this town and so many institutions and people across the globe have become fabulously wealthy on the back of Van Gogh's legacy, when during his lifetime, as you surely know, he was subject only to ridicule and local contempt. But that's another story and certainly a whole other video. But Arles is also host every summer to Les Rencontres de Arles, the justly celebrated International Photography Festival. If you walk around those sun-drenched streets, you will come across all sorts of municipal buildings, halls, churches, with exhibitions of photographers both past and present, mostly of a very high order indeed. This year, I suppose, the star attraction, for many people at least, was William Wegman. I first discovered Wegman's dog photos decades ago, deep into the last century certainly. So by now I'm rather bored with them, I'm afraid to say. Once you've seen one Weimaraner in fancy dress, you've seen them all as far as I'm concerned. But I went to see 3 shows in particular. One was a sort of retrospective of Robert Frank's photographs of America in the 1950s. The second was one of my favourite contemporary photographers and filmmaker, Raymond Ecuador, from his series America from the 1970s, which was a terrific show. These are a few sneaky installation photographs I took as I was walking around the exhibition. It's easy enough to find photo books and online material about Ecuador's photographs. It's more tricky to find his film documentaries, the last one of which I caught at a film festival a few months ago. It was called 12 Days, about how we treat and institutionalise people with mental health problems and how the care workers themselves, although very well-meaning, kind of become abusive and institutionalised themselves in dealing with these issues. Not an easy watch, but I'm a huge admirer of Ecuador's social and political radicalism, as ardent now as it was when he was first documenting workers living in the 1960s. The third exhibition I wanted to see, and the star of this particular video, is Paul Graham, who was exhibiting his so-called American trilogy, or at least part of it, called The Whiteness of the Whale. I first came across Graham, I think, when he won the Deutsche Börse Photography Prize in 2009. He later won the Hasselblad Award in 2012, and this image in particular caught my attention at that time. It's called Lawnmower Man, well, that's what I call it, from his A Shimmer of Possibility series, which is one of the series that makes up the American trilogy. On the one hand, it's an everyday scene, almost a snapshot, but on the other hand, it's beautifully done. That early evening light, or early morning light, it looks like evening to me, slanting across the hills there, the beautiful golden honey tonalities in the scene with the sort of ochre greens and yellows and blues, and even that red solar flare that you can see there between his legs next to the blue towel that he's holding. There's a kind of everything seems to be colour coordinated, even though I'm sure it isn't. That's the scene that he saw it as he saw it. But there seems to be a kind of stars and stripes theme to it. Now, I don't know whether that red solar flare was actually hand-coloured after the event. I don't know. Maybe it's natural, maybe it isn't. But even if it is photoshopped, bravo for even thinking about it, because it's just right. There's a kind of familiar strangeness to this photograph. But then later on, probably about a year later, I saw similar photographs of this same event, and they were obviously done of the same series that I hadn't been aware of. They were similar photographs, but from a slightly different point of view, from a slightly different time as well, and position. And I didn't quite understand what these were, whether they were alternate images or rejects or what. And so it was in this exhibition in Arles I was delighted to see the full suite of lawnmower images, and I now understand what he was doing. This is another example of a man smoking. He will take a photograph of the subject and take a series of images, some of them almost identical, some of them slightly different from slightly different angles, a detail, part of a face, a detail of the background, something lying on the floor next to the subject, for example. It's as if we're actually walking around the scene talking to him. Our eyes are moving constantly from him to the wall to the detail, so that over the course of 6, 7, 8 images, whatever it happens to be, we build up a picture in our heads of the scene as if we were there. Because in reality, if we are talking to somebody, we don't view them as a traditional photographic portrait sees them, where you have the totality of the face in perfect focus and everything else is blurred out with a nice bit of bokeh. Human beings don't see as a camera sees. Our eyes are constantly moving, we pick up details, we pick up impressions, and our brain fills in the gaps. We look into people's eyes, but then we glance at their hair, at their ears, down at their feet. We look past them, we look back into their eyes, we move from the left eye to the right eye. And this is what Graham does in his work. Each image in the series is adding to your knowledge of the subject, the entire series constituting one work, one complete picture that you have pieced together. I see this as a kind of continuation, or perhaps even a homage, to David Hockney's photo techniques of the 1980s. I actually did a separate video on that a while ago, but just to recap, Hockney made some very interesting photographic works where he tried to use the camera to emulate human vision and the human sense of perspective. The fact that we have two eyes constantly moving, searching, focusing, refocusing. He tried to give this monocular, two-dimensional machine, the camera, a more three-dimensional human aspect. And I think he was rather successful in that. He managed to give the photographic image, normally so static and controlled, a real sense of movement and depth. This is another series of Paul Graham, woman eating at a bus stop. Side of the head, details of hands and finger food, debris at her feet, and an after-dinner smoke. I wasn't sure when I was walking around the show whether the photographs were staged. A lot of art photographers nowadays like to see themselves as film directors with actors and sets and big budgets too often. But she doesn't look too happy to me, so I don't think she's pretending. Paul Graham is doing something similar with these multi-image scenes to David Hockney, although he's not as interested in the nature of human vision or perspective as Hockney. Hockney is fascinated by the constant struggle between the flatness of the picture surface and the multi-dimensional time and space in which we live. But Graham is clearly trying to immerse the spectator into the scene by giving you a series of images, often different sizes, large and small, hung right next to each other. Paul Graham may not share Hockney's obsession with turning photographic perspective inside out, But he is a far more political animal than Hockney. From his earliest work he has shown a concern for the underclass, the unemployed, the dispossessed, the overlooked in society. In the 1980s he produced his series Beyond Caring, which shows the unemployment offices and waiting rooms of job centres in cities that no longer had any jobs, as Margaret Thatcher's government in Britain closed factories, mines, ports, and sold off national assets to the highest bidder. Graham moved to the United States many years ago, but his concern for social injustice has continued. Another series in his American trilogy is called American Nights, which reflect the social fabric of contemporary America, the haves and the have-nots, the wealthy suburbs and the ghettos juxtaposed together, which indeed they often are in reality, a couple of blocks separating the millionaires from the down-and-outs. He uses the idea of overexposing the image of the poor districts to such an extent that they can hardly be seen at all. They are faint, ghostly images, invisible physically and metaphorically to their rich neighbours at their sides. I wasn't quite sure what to make of these huge white images, to tell you the truth. I appreciate the metaphor, the idea of a literal invisibility compounding the social invisibility. But it also smacked to me of art world gimmickry, and perhaps a bit pretentious. However, as somebody once said, anything serious and important veers towards pretension. And as I walked out of this exhibition back into the bright, sunlit and wealthy streets of Arles, I was left in no doubt that Paul Graham is one of our most serious and important contemporary photographers.